The people who embarrass you in public are often the least prepared for the truth. The ballroom shimmered beneath crystal chandeliers worth more than most people earned in a year, their warm light reflecting across polished marble floors and rows of perfectly arranged tables dressed in white linen. Soft jazz floated through the air, while waiters carried silver trays filled with sparkling drinks and gourmet appetizers, weaving effortlessly among executives dressed in custom suits and designer gowns. It was the annual Carter Global Industries Gala, the most anticipated corporate event in Chicago, attended by board members, investors, senior executives, media personalities, and employees who believed tonight would determine the future leadership of one of America's fastest-growing technology companies. Conversations buzzed with excitement, speculation, and carefully disguised ambition. Everyone wanted to impress the board. Everyone wanted to be noticed. And almost no one noticed the quiet man standing alone near the back of the ballroom. Daniel Carter wore a simple navy suit without an expensive watch or flashy accessories. His tie was slightly loose, and his expression carried the calm confidence of someone who had long ago stopped measuring his worth by appearances. To most of the guests, he looked like nothing more than the quiet husband of Sophia Carter, a woman whose charm, confidence, and polished image had made her one of the company's rising public faces. Over the past year, whispers had spread throughout the office that Daniel contributed very little to his wife's success. Some assumed he stayed home. Others believed he had failed in business years earlier. A few joked that he was simply lucky enough to marry above his station. Daniel had heard every rumor without correcting a single one. Sometimes silence revealed more about people than arguments ever could. Across the ballroom, Sophia laughed brightly as she accepted compliments from co-workers gathered around Ryan Mitchell, the company's ambitious marketing director. Ryan carried himself with effortless confidence, shaking hands, telling stories, and soaking up every ounce of admiration directed his way. Standing beside him, Sophia looked happier than she had in months, smiling in ways Daniel no longer recognized. Their eyes met only briefly before she turned away as though he were another anonymous guest passing through the crowd. Daniel quietly checked the time on his phone before slipping it back into his pocket. In exactly 20 minutes, the chairman was scheduled to make an announcement that would permanently change the company. Very few people knew what that announcement actually was. Daniel certainly did. In fact, he had approved every word that would soon appear on the massive LED screen overlooking the stage. But until then, he simply watched. Near the center of the ballroom, Ryan raised a glass and called for everyone's attention. The conversations faded. Music softened. Dozens of faces turned toward him with eager smiles. Ryan thanked everyone for another successful year, praising teamwork while confidently speaking as though the company's future naturally belonged to people like him. Each sentence drew louder applause. Sophia stood proudly at his side, occasionally placing a supportive hand on his arm, a gesture subtle enough to appear innocent yet impossible for Daniel to misunderstand. He remained perfectly still. Several employees glanced toward him, exchanging amused smiles before quickly looking away. One whispered something that caused another to chuckle. Daniel ignored them. He had spent years building something extraordinary. A few careless opinions could never diminish that. Then everything changed in a single unexpected moment. Sophia stepped away from Ryan and walked directly toward Daniel. Her heels echoed sharply across the silent ballroom floor, drawing curious attention from nearby guests. She stopped only inches away from her husband, her expression cold, disappointed, almost rehearsed. For a brief second, Daniel searched her eyes for the warmth that had once existed between them. He found none. Without raising her voice, she accused him of embarrassing her by showing up looking ordinary at such an important event. Several guests leaned closer, pretending not to listen while absorbing every word. Daniel calmly replied that appearances had never defined a person's value. His answer only seemed to frustrate her more. Hoping to impress the people surrounding Ryan and desperate to distance herself from the man she now considered beneath her, Sophia struck Daniel across the face with a single sharp slap that echoed through the ballroom. The music stopped instantly. Glasses froze halfway to waiting lips. Conversations disappeared. Hundreds of eyes locked onto the stunned silence between husband and wife. Daniel slowly turned his head back toward her. He did not argue. He did not shout. He did not raise a hand. Instead, Something almost impossible appeared on his face. He smiled. Not the smile of someone defeated, but the quiet smile of a man who had just realized everyone in the room was about to discover a truth they never imagined. Daniel's smile unsettled everyone far more than anger ever could. The silence hanging over the ballroom felt heavier than the sound of the slap itself. Sophia expected embarrassment. Ryan expected humiliation. The guests expected excuses. Instead, Daniel simply adjusted the cuff of his jacket as though nothing important had happened. His calm expression confused the crowd. Some executives exchanged uncertain glances while others quietly reached for their phones, sensing they had just witnessed the beginning of a scandal that would spread across every office by morning. Sophia folded her arms, determined not to let the moment slip away. She believed every pair of eyes in the room validated her decision. For months, she had convinced herself that Daniel lacked ambition, lacked confidence, and lacked the ability to stand beside the successful woman she believed she had become. She no longer remembered the patient husband who had supported every difficult season of her career. All she saw now was a quiet man wearing an ordinary suit among people she considered extraordinary. Ryan stepped forward with a polished smile that barely concealed his satisfaction. In a voice carefully balanced between sympathy and superiority, he suggested that Daniel should leave before creating more discomfort for everyone attending the celebration. Several employees nodded in agreement. One manager quietly muttered that security should probably escort him outside before reporters noticed the situation. Daniel looked around the room, studying faces instead of words. Some appeared uncomfortable. Some looked entertained. Others avoided eye contact completely, unwilling to defend someone they believed had already lost. It fascinated him how quickly people measured another person's value based entirely on appearance and public opinion. He had seen this pattern countless times throughout his career while evaluating future leaders. Pressure did not create character. It revealed it. Across the ballroom, members of the board of directors had quietly gathered near the stage. Their expressions remained unreadable, though several exchanged concerned looks after witnessing the confrontation. One elderly director instinctively took a step toward Daniel before another gently touched his arm, silently reminding him to wait. The schedule had been carefully planned. The announcement would begin in only a few minutes. Daniel had insisted that nothing be interrupted regardless of what happened beforehand. Now the board understood exactly why he had made that unusual request. The truth was revealing itself without anyone needing to force it. Near the entrance, 2 security officers received instructions through discreet earpieces. They immediately straightened their posture after recognizing the unexpected tension unfolding inside the ballroom. One of them glanced toward Daniel with obvious concern, but remained at his assigned position after receiving another quiet instruction. Daniel noticed the exchange, but gave the slightest shake of his head. There would be no unnecessary scene tonight. Everything would unfold exactly as planned. Sophia mistook his silence for surrender. She let out a disappointed sigh and spoke loudly enough for nearby guests to hear. She declared that she had spent years trying to help Daniel become someone respectable, but some people simply refused to change. A few uncomfortable laughs echoed through the room. Ryan placed a reassuring hand near her shoulder, presenting himself as the supportive colleague everyone admired. The gesture drew approving smiles from several executives who believed they were witnessing loyalty instead of manipulation. Daniel watched without interrupting. Deep inside, disappointment weighed far more heavily than anger. Wealth had never been the foundation of his marriage. Trust had been. And trust, once quietly broken over time, rarely collapsed in a single dramatic moment. It disappeared through countless small choices that eventually became impossible to ignore. Suddenly, the ballroom lights dimmed slightly. The giant LED screen above the stage illuminated with the Carter Global Industries logo, as elegant orchestral music replaced the earlier jazz performance. Conversations immediately faded. Every guest instinctively turned toward the stage. A master of ceremonies dressed in a tailored black tuxedo walked confidently beneath the spotlight, carrying a sealed envelope. His composed smile suggested that everything was proceeding exactly according to schedule. Ryan confidently adjusted his jacket, convinced the coming announcement would elevate his own position inside the company. Sophia stood proudly beside him, believing this evening marked the beginning of an even brighter future. Daniel quietly slipped both hands into his pockets and looked toward the stage with the peaceful expression of someone who already knew every word hidden inside that envelope. The master of ceremonies smiled warmly as the spotlight swept across the elegant stage, completely unaware that nearly every meaningful conversation in the ballroom had already stopped. The atmosphere had changed. Moments earlier, the guests had been celebrating another profitable year. Now curiosity and quiet tension lingered over every table. The master of ceremonies welcomed everyone, thanking investors, executives, and employees for helping Carter Global Industries become one of the most respected technology companies in the country. Polite applause filled the room, but many eyes continued drifting toward Daniel, who remained standing near the back of the ballroom with the same calm expression that had unsettled everyone since the confrontation. Ryan folded his arms with growing confidence. He had spent months building relationships with influential executives, attending every networking event, and presenting himself as the natural choice for greater responsibility inside the company. Tonight, he believed those efforts would finally be rewarded. Several department heads quietly congratulated him in advance, convinced the upcoming announcement would include his promotion to executive vice president. Ryan accepted every compliment with practiced humility, although the satisfaction on his face was impossible to hide. Beside him, Sophia stood proudly, convinced that her future was finally separating from the ordinary life she believed Daniel represented. She imagined a future filled with prestige, influence, and recognition. Looking toward Daniel one final time, she felt no regret, only certainty that she had chosen the stronger path. She had spent months convincing herself that success belonged beside success, and that ambition deserved ambition. She never questioned whether she had mistaken appearance for character. Meanwhile, Daniel quietly observed the room exactly as he had planned. Every smile, every whisper, every nervous glance became another piece of a puzzle that had already been forming long before tonight. Nearly a year earlier, he had instructed the board to keep his ownership completely confidential outside a very small circle of directors and legal advisors. He wanted the company culture to develop without people chasing his approval. He wanted promotions based on integrity instead of flattery. He wanted to discover who respected people without first asking how much they were worth. The experiment had produced answers more painful than he expected. Several senior employees who had always greeted him warmly when they believed he was merely Sophia's husband now deliberately looked away, unwilling to associate themselves with someone they assumed had become an embarrassment. Others quietly smiled among themselves, already constructing tomorrow's office gossip before the evening had even ended. Daniel did not resent them. He simply accepted that pressure had revealed what comfort had hidden. Near the stage, an elderly board member named Charles Whitmore adjusted his glasses and checked his watch for the third time. He had served beside Daniel since the company's earliest days, back when they worked from a rented warehouse with folding tables, borrowed computers, and dreams far larger than their budget. Charles knew exactly how much Daniel had sacrificed to build Carter Global Industries into a business valued in the billions. Watching the founder stand alone while strangers judged him based on an inexpensive suit deeply troubled him, but he honored Daniel's request to remain silent until the proper moment. Suddenly, a production assistant hurried onto the stage and quietly handed the master of ceremonies a small envelope different from the one he had been holding. The audience barely noticed the exchange, but several board members immediately straightened in their seats. Ryan interpreted the movement as excitement over the promotion announcements. Sophia gently squeezed his hand for a brief moment before letting go as nearby guests smiled approvingly. Daniel noticed everything without reacting. The master of ceremonies opened the new envelope, paused for an unusually long second, then looked toward the board with visible surprise. Charles responded with a calm nod. The presenter cleared his throat before speaking again, explaining that before recognizing executive achievements, the company wished to honor a person whose vision had transformed a small startup into an American success story admired across the business world. A respectful silence settled over the ballroom. Ryan smiled confidently, assuming the tribute would recognize a retired founder appearing by pre-recorded video. Sophia relaxed, believing the uncomfortable events from earlier had already faded into the background. Daniel slowly lifted his eyes toward the illuminated stage as the enormous screen behind the presenter faded to black, preparing to reveal the first image. At that exact moment, almost every heartbeat in the ballroom seemed to pause, while Daniel remained the only person who looked completely at peace. The giant screen remained completely dark for several long seconds, allowing anticipation to spread through the ballroom like a silent current. Nobody spoke. Even the servers carrying silver trays had stopped moving. Every eye was fixed on the stage, waiting for the first image to appear. Daniel stood quietly with both hands resting inside his pockets, his breathing steady, his expression unchanged. For him, the silence felt familiar. He had spent years making decisions inside rooms where patience always mattered more than speed. Across the ballroom, Ryan leaned slightly towards Sophia and whispered that the company was probably preparing an expensive video celebrating its corporate history. Sophia smiled with quiet confidence. She welcomed the distraction. The uncomfortable confrontation from only moments before already seemed to be fading into the background, replaced by the excitement of executive announcements. Around them, department leaders adjusted their jackets and dresses while exchanging optimistic smiles. Everyone assumed the evening had returned to normal. Then a single photograph slowly appeared across the enormous screen. It showed an old brick warehouse standing on the south side of Chicago nearly 2 decades earlier. The building looked forgotten, with faded paint, cracked windows, and a small loading dock that barely looked capable of supporting a growing business. Soft piano music replaced the orchestral score, creating an atmosphere that felt unexpectedly personal. Confused whispers drifted through the audience. Very few employees recognized the image. The younger executives had joined the company long after those difficult years had passed. The master of ceremonies smiled gently before speaking again. He explained that every great company begins with someone willing to believe in a future that nobody else can yet imagine. The second photograph faded onto the screen. A much younger man sat alone inside that same warehouse, surrounded by folding tables, outdated computer equipment, empty pizza boxes, and handwritten sketches covering the walls. His sleeves were rolled up. His tie was missing. Dark circles rested beneath tired eyes that still carried determination. Several guests leaned forward, trying to recognize the face. Ryan narrowed his eyes. Sophia unconsciously took a small step closer to the stage. Something about the photograph felt strangely familiar, although neither of them immediately understood why. Daniel quietly lowered his eyes for just a moment as memories returned without invitation. He remembered sleeping on an old couch because paying rent mattered more than renting an apartment. He remembered driving a pickup truck with nearly 200,000 miles because every available dollar belonged inside the business instead of his personal life. He remembered working through birthdays, holidays, and weekends because he believed one day thousands of families would depend upon the company he was building. None of those sacrifices had ever felt like burdens. They had been investments in a dream larger than himself. Charles Whitmore watched Daniel from across the room with quiet admiration. He alone knew how many acquisition offers Daniel had rejected over the years, refusing billions of dollars because he believed employees deserved stability more than shareholders deserved quick profits. Those decisions had transformed Carter Global Industries into one of the most respected companies in America. Yet almost no one attending tonight understood whose vision had created everything surrounding them. The master of ceremonies continued, explaining that success rarely belongs to the loudest voice in the room. Sometimes it belongs to the person willing to work quietly while everyone else searches for recognition. The audience listened carefully now. Smiles slowly faded as curiosity replaced confidence. Another photograph appeared. This time the image showed the same young entrepreneur shaking hands with construction workers during the opening of the company's first manufacturing facility. Another image followed, showing him visiting employees after a tornado damaged one of the company's regional offices. Another displayed him sitting beside a hospital bed comforting the child of an injured employee. There were no photographs of luxury cars, private islands, or glamorous parties. Every picture told the story of someone who had built a business by investing in people instead of appearances. Sophia stared at the screen without blinking. The angle of the man's face, the quiet smile, the familiar posture, every new photograph dissolved another layer of certainty inside her mind. Ryan's confident expression slowly tightened. He glanced toward Daniel for only a second before immediately looking back at the screen, dismissing the uneasy feeling growing inside him. But the feeling refused to disappear. The final photograph slowly faded into view, showing the founder standing in front of the completed global headquarters on opening day, wearing the very same calm smile that Daniel still carried tonight. A heavy silence settled over the ballroom as dozens of people instinctively turned away from the screen and looked toward the quiet man standing alone near the back of the room. No one moved. No one even seemed willing to breathe too loudly. The enormous photograph remained frozen on the screen, while dozens of faces slowly turned toward Daniel with growing disbelief. The quiet man who had been ignored for most of the evening suddenly looked completely different, even though he had not changed his posture, his expression, or a single piece of clothing. The difference existed only inside the minds of everyone watching him. Ryan forced an uneasy laugh and quietly shook his head as though convincing himself there had to be some misunderstanding. Companies often honored retired founders. Perhaps Daniel had simply worked with the man years ago. Perhaps the resemblance was nothing more than coincidence. He searched for any explanation that would allow reality to return to the version he preferred. Beside him, Sophia could no longer look away from either the screen or her husband. Memories she had ignored for years began returning with painful clarity. She remembered Daniel leaving home before sunrise during the earliest years of their marriage. She remembered late-night phone calls that always seemed connected to important decisions. She remembered confidential meetings he never discussed and unexpected business trips that he always described as routine consulting work. She had stopped asking questions long ago because she believed the answers were unimportant. She had mistaken privacy for insignificance. The master of ceremonies allowed the silence to linger before speaking once again. His voice carried genuine admiration rather than theatrical excitement. He explained that the founder had requested complete anonymity throughout the company's rapid expansion because he believed recognition should belong to employees, not executives. He said the founder wanted every promotion to be earned through character and competence rather than personal connections. He wanted to know which leaders would still treat others with dignity when they believed no powerful person was watching. A quiet murmur spread through the ballroom. Several executives instinctively looked at one another with uncomfortable expressions. The evening suddenly felt less like a celebration and more like an unexpected examination. Charles Whitmore slowly rose from his seat at the board table. Every director beside him followed without hesitation. One after another, the entire board stood in complete silence. Investors noticed first and immediately stood as well. Senior vice presidents followed. Department heads rose next. Within seconds, nearly the entire ballroom was standing without anyone asking them to do so. The only people who remained frozen in place were Ryan and Sophia, both struggling to understand why the room around them had transformed so completely. Daniel remained exactly where he had been all evening. He neither encouraged the attention nor appeared to enjoy it. His calm humility only deepened the growing respect filling the room. The master of ceremonies looked toward the back of the ballroom and smiled warmly. He then delivered the sentence that permanently changed the atmosphere inside the hall. He invited the visionary who had founded Carter Global Industries, remained its majority shareholder, and continued serving as chairman of the board to please join everyone on stage. Hundreds of eyes immediately settled on Daniel. No one whispered now. No one laughed. Even the cameras covering the event slowly pivoted toward the quiet man standing alone near the entrance. Sophia felt the color drain from her face as every missing piece suddenly fit together with terrifying clarity. Ryan instinctively took one uncertain step backward. Daniel looked around the ballroom one final time before slowly removing his hands from his pockets. He straightened his jacket with the same calm precision he had shown after being publicly humiliated only minutes earlier. Then, without anger, pride, or satisfaction, he began walking toward the stage. The crowd naturally stepped aside, creating a clear path through the center of the ballroom. Employees who had ignored him moments earlier now lowered their eyes with visible embarrassment. Executives who had dismissed him respectfully moved out of his way. The distance to the stage was less than 100 feet, yet every step seemed to rewrite everything people believed they knew about the man they had judged. Daniel finally reached the bottom of the stage, paused for a brief moment, and quietly climbed the steps as the board members welcomed him with expressions of genuine respect. The ballroom remained completely silent, because everyone understood that the most important announcement of the evening had only just begun. Daniel walked across the stage without rushing, acknowledging neither the stunned expressions nor the hundreds of eyes fixed upon him. Charles Whitmore was the first to extend his hand. Daniel accepted it with quiet gratitude before greeting each member of the board with the same calm respect that had defined his leadership for years. There were no dramatic gestures, no triumphant celebration, and no trace of satisfaction over what had just unfolded. His composure spoke louder than any speech ever could. Once he reached the center of the stage, the audience remained standing in complete silence. The master of ceremonies stepped aside and offered Daniel the microphone. For several long seconds, Daniel simply looked across the ballroom. He recognized nearly every face. Some had worked beside him for 15 years. Others had joined only recently. He saw employees who had celebrated together, managers he had personally promoted, interns who had become executives, and board members who had helped build the company from its earliest days. Then his eyes briefly rested on Sophia and Ryan. Neither of them could meet his gaze for more than a moment. Daniel smiled gently before speaking. He thanked everyone for attending the evening and congratulated every employee whose dedication had helped Carter Global Industries grow from a small warehouse into an organization serving millions of customers across the country. His voice remained steady and sincere, carrying none of the bitterness many people expected after witnessing the events only minutes earlier. He explained that success had never belonged to one person. Every engineer, every accountant, every receptionist, every technician, every customer service representative, and every warehouse employee had helped shape the company's future. That was why he had chosen to remain anonymous for so many years. He wanted people to build relationships based on honesty rather than influence. He wanted leaders to reveal who they truly were when they believed nobody important was watching. Around the ballroom, many employees quietly lowered their eyes. Daniel was not accusing anyone directly, yet his words carried enough truth to make self-reflection unavoidable. He continued by explaining that character could never be measured by a business title, a tailored suit, or the size of a bank account. Character appeared in ordinary moments, especially when someone believed another person had nothing to offer in return. Respect, he said, was most meaningful when it was given freely instead of strategically. The ballroom remained absolutely still. Ryan felt every sentence growing heavier. Only an hour earlier, he had believed himself to be one of the company's brightest rising stars. Now he wondered how many conversations, decisions, and private moments Daniel had quietly observed throughout the past year. Sophia stood motionless, replaying countless memories inside her mind. She remembered dismissing Daniel's quiet advice, questioning his lack of ambition, and believing that his simple lifestyle reflected limited success. Now every assumption she had made collapsed under the weight of reality. Daniel paused before continuing. He explained that earlier in the evening he had witnessed something deeply disappointing, but he refused to let one painful moment overshadow everything the company had accomplished together. Carter Global Industries had been built upon innovation, trust, humility, and mutual respect. Those values would continue guiding every decision made by its leadership. Then he turned slightly toward the board. Charles handed him a slim leather portfolio. Daniel opened it carefully before looking back toward the audience. He announced that the annual leadership review had officially concluded earlier that afternoon. Every executive evaluation had been finalized before the gala began. Tonight's unexpected events had not influenced those decisions because integrity required fairness even when emotions ran high. Several executives exchanged surprised glances. Daniel believed policies should protect everyone equally, including people who had disappointed him personally. He closed the portfolio without revealing its contents and thanked the evaluation committee for completing months of careful work. Finally, he looked across the ballroom once more, his expression calm but unmistakably resolute. He explained that tomorrow morning the company would begin a new chapter, one shaped not merely by financial performance, but by the quality of leadership demonstrated every single day. In that moment, almost everyone understood the evening had never been about exposing one person's hidden identity. It had always been about revealing everyone else's true character. Daniel allowed the silence to settle naturally before opening the leather portfolio once again. The room had transformed completely. Less than an hour earlier, conversations had revolved around promotions, bonuses, and ambitious plans for the coming year. Now every person inside the ballroom understood that something far more significant was taking place. This was no longer simply an awards gala. It had become a lesson that no leadership seminar could ever teach. Daniel looked toward Charles Whitmore, who gave a respectful nod before returning to his seat. Daniel then explained that the executive review process had measured far more than quarterly revenue and successful projects. It had examined decision-making, accountability, teamwork, humility, and the ability to treat every employee with dignity regardless of position. Numbers could build a profitable company, he said, but character determined whether that company deserved to succeed. His words carried quiet authority because they came without anger or accusation. He turned another page inside the portfolio and announced that several senior leaders would receive expanded responsibilities beginning the following morning. Warm applause filled the ballroom as respected department heads heard their names called one by one. Many of them appeared genuinely surprised. These were individuals known for mentoring younger employees, listening before speaking, and giving credit to their teams instead of themselves. Daniel personally congratulated each of them with a handshake before they returned to their tables. The atmosphere slowly became hopeful again, reminding everyone that integrity was still being recognized. Then Daniel paused. The ballroom immediately fell silent once more. He explained that leadership also required difficult decisions when company values were compromised. Carter Global Industries had clear standards for executive conduct because trust represented the foundation of every partnership inside the organization. Those standards applied equally to every employee regardless of title, influence, or personal relationships. Nobody stood above them, including himself. Ryan felt a knot tighten in his stomach. He maintained a composed expression, but his confidence had disappeared. He glanced towards several executives who only minutes earlier had been congratulating him. None of them returned his look. Daniel calmly announced that the Executive Leadership Committee had unanimously decided not to proceed with Ryan Mitchell's scheduled promotion. A quiet gasp moved through the ballroom. Daniel continued with complete professionalism, explaining that the decision had been finalized before tonight's event after a comprehensive review identified repeated concerns regarding judgment, professional conduct, and alignment with the company's leadership principles. This was not a punishment delivered in the heat of emotion. It was the conclusion of a months-long evaluation supported by documented evidence and approved through the company's established governance process. Ryan stood completely still, unable to reconcile the future he had imagined with the reality unfolding before him. Daniel did not criticize him personally. He did not reveal private details or invite public embarrassment. Instead, he simply stated that leadership opportunities carried extraordinary responsibility and that every candidate deserved a fair, confidential process. Ryan would continue receiving the respect owed to every employee while the company completed the appropriate transition procedures. The dignity Daniel extended toward the man who had shown him so little respect did not go unnoticed. Several board members quietly nodded in approval. Daniel then turned his attention to the broader audience. He reminded everyone that careers could recover from professional disappointment, but rebuilding trust required honesty, accountability, and genuine personal growth. Companies could teach technical skills, he explained, but integrity remained a choice each individual made every day. As he spoke, Sophia stood frozen only a few yards from the stage. She realized that Daniel had been given countless opportunities to humiliate her in return, yet he had chosen restraint every single time. He had protected the company's reputation, respected its policies, and preserved the dignity of every person involved, including those who had wounded him. That realization weighed more heavily than any public criticism could have. Daniel closed the portfolio for the final time and rested one hand upon it. Looking across the room filled with employees, investors, and longtime friends, he offered one final thought. He said that every person eventually encounters moments when nobody believes they matter, when appearances become more influential than truth, and when silence feels easier than defending oneself. In those moments, he encouraged everyone to remember that real leadership begins long before recognition arrives. It begins with how people choose to treat someone who appears to have nothing they need. The ballroom erupted into sustained applause, not because they had witnessed power reclaim its place, but because they had witnessed dignity refuse to surrender it. Sustained applause gradually softened into respectful silence as Daniel stepped away from the podium. He did not linger beneath the spotlight or wait for additional praise. Instead, he thanked the audience with a simple nod before handing the microphone back to the master of ceremonies. The board members rose once again, not because protocol required it, but because they understood they had just witnessed the kind of leadership that could not be taught inside any classroom. Daniel quietly descended the steps from the stage and began walking through the ballroom at the same unhurried pace he had maintained all evening. This time, however, every person who had once overlooked him instinctively moved aside. Employees who had never spoken to him offered respectful greetings. Managers lowered their eyes with visible humility. Several longtime staff members smiled warmly, finally understanding why the company's culture had always emphasized kindness over status. Daniel acknowledged each person with quiet courtesy, making no distinction between executives, assistants, servers, or security officers. To him, every individual deserved the same respect. Near the center of the ballroom, Sophia remained standing exactly where Daniel had last seen her before walking onto the stage. Her confident posture had disappeared. The certainty that had guided every decision she made throughout the evening had quietly dissolved, replaced by painful self-awareness. As Daniel approached, she took one hesitant step forward. Her voice trembled as she softly called his name. He stopped and turned toward her with the same calm expression he had carried from the beginning of the evening. For several seconds, neither of them spoke. The silence between them contained years of shared memories, unspoken disappointment, and choices that neither of them could undo. Sophia lowered her eyes before quietly admitting that she had been wrong. She confessed that somewhere along the way she had stopped seeing the person standing beside her and had started judging him by appearances instead of character. She said she had allowed ambition, public image, and the opinions of others to become more important than the trust they had once shared. Her words were sincere, but even as she spoke, she understood that honesty could acknowledge a mistake without erasing its consequences. Daniel listened without interrupting. His expression remained compassionate rather than cold. When she finished, he gently thanked her for telling the truth. Then he spoke in a calm voice that only those standing nearby could hear. He explained that forgiveness and trust were not the same thing. Forgiveness allowed people to move forward without carrying bitterness. Trust, however, was built slowly through consistent choices and could disappear just as gradually. Once lost, it could not simply return because someone wished it to. Sophia quietly nodded as tears filled her eyes, not because Daniel had spoken harshly, but because he had not. His kindness revealed the full weight of everything she had thrown away. A few feet away, Ryan stood alone, watching the conversation from a distance. Earlier in the evening, groups of executives had surrounded him with admiration and congratulations. Now he found himself standing by himself as conversations naturally shifted elsewhere. Nobody mocked him. Nobody celebrated his disappointment. They simply recognized that influence built upon appearances could disappear as quickly as it arrived. Ryan slowly approached Daniel after Sophia stepped aside. His confident smile was gone, replaced by genuine humility. He admitted that he had allowed professional success to become personal arrogance. He acknowledged that he had mistaken confidence for leadership and influence for respect. Daniel listened patiently before offering a firm handshake. He reminded Ryan that careers could recover from failure if people chose honesty over excuses and growth over resentment. One difficult chapter did not have to define an entire life. What mattered most was the decision made after the lesson had been learned. Ryan accepted the handshake with quiet gratitude, understanding that he had received something more valuable than another promotion. Throughout the ballroom, employees watched the scene unfold with silent admiration. They expected revenge. They witnessed restraint. They expected public humiliation. They witnessed dignity. They expected power to dominate. Instead, they saw power guided by wisdom. As the evening slowly returned to quiet conversation and soft music, one truth settled into every corner of the ballroom. Wealth had never been the greatest difference between Daniel and everyone who had judged him. Character had been. And unlike titles, applause, or fortune, character could never be borrowed, purchased, or pretended. It could only be revealed when life quietly placed it on display. The gala slowly returned to life, but it no longer felt like the same celebration that had begun earlier that evening. Conversations became quieter, laughter more thoughtful, and every handshake carried a sincerity that had been missing only an hour before. The orchestra resumed its gentle performance while guests reflected on everything they had witnessed. Some spoke about the company's future. Others discussed leadership, humility, and the surprising lesson that had unfolded before their eyes. Yet the story everyone would remember had nothing to do with profits, stock prices, or executive promotions. It was about the quiet power of character. Daniel stepped outside onto the terrace overlooking the Chicago skyline. A cool evening breeze drifted across the city as thousands of lights stretched toward the horizon. For the first time that night, he allowed himself a slow, deep breath. The weight he had carried for months no longer rested on his shoulders. The truth was no longer hidden, and neither was the character of the people around him. He did not feel victorious. He simply felt free. Charles Whitmore joined him a few moments later, carrying 2 cups of fresh coffee. He handed one to Daniel with a familiar smile before thanking him for handling the evening with extraordinary grace. Charles admitted that several members of the board had expected Daniel to react very differently after everything that had happened. Daniel smiled quietly and looked back through the ballroom windows. He explained that anger might satisfy a moment, but dignity could influence a lifetime. Companies could recover from financial losses, but cultures rarely recovered from leaders who allowed emotion to replace principle. Charles nodded, understanding why Daniel had earned the loyalty of so many people throughout the years. Inside the ballroom, employees continued sharing stories about moments when Daniel had quietly helped them without asking for recognition. One manager remembered that Daniel had personally paid for emergency equipment after a regional office suffered storm damage years earlier without allowing anyone to announce his contribution. Another employee recalled receiving a handwritten note from the founder after losing a family member, even though they had never met face to face. Story after story spread across the room until many younger employees realized they had spent years working for a man they had never truly known. Near the entrance, Sophia quietly collected her belongings before taking one last look across the ballroom. She watched Daniel speaking with employees, greeting security officers, thanking servers, and listening to interns with the same attention he gave board members. At that moment, she finally understood what genuine influence looked like. It did not demand attention. It earned respect naturally through countless quiet choices made over many years. She understood that some opportunities in life could not be recovered once they had been abandoned. She accepted that truth with humility before quietly leaving the ballroom, determined to become a better person regardless of where life led her next. Ryan remained behind for a while longer, speaking privately with several colleagues and thanking them for their honesty throughout the leadership review process. For the first time in many years, he stopped trying to impress the people around him and simply listened. The lesson had been painful, but it had also given him something success never had: perspective. Whether his future remained at Carter Global Industries or took him somewhere else, he knew that titles alone could never replace integrity. As the evening came to an end, Daniel walked through the nearly empty ballroom one final time. He paused only briefly beside the stage where everything had changed. The same polished floor, the same elegant lights, and the same audience had witnessed 2 completely different kinds of power. One had depended upon appearances and disappeared within minutes. The other had remained quiet until truth revealed it without effort. Daniel smiled gently before leaving the building and stepping into the cool Chicago night. Behind him stood the company he had built. Ahead of him waited another chapter shaped not by revenge, but by purpose. Because in the end, the greatest success is never proving people wrong. It is remaining true to your values long enough for the truth to speak for itself. And sometimes the strongest person in the room is not the one everyone notices first, but the one who never has to remind anyone who they are.